If you nail your character's intro, you can get the audience to care in literal seconds. Take Luke gazing at the suns longingly. That's it. That is all we need to get his character. No dialogue, no voiceover, just a simple shot reverse shot reveals how he wants to leave his banal life behind and go and do something exciting. It's a very relatable thing to be suffering from, and just like that, we're on board with Luke's character. But hey, you don't need to make them relatable. Take the Joker or Death in Puss in Boots. We may not like the guy, but damn it if we're not on the edge of our seats, keen to see more of this character, and how they'll be such a formidable challenge to our protagonist down the line. It's not all fun and games, because if you writers out there screw this up, you're done for. Like seriously, you're done. Think about it this way. Us seeing a character for the first time isn't just our first impression of them, it's often our first impression of you, the writer. And as we all know, first impressions have a lasting power. If you do a bad character introduction, that's like an athlete tripping at the first hurdle of a race. The pressure's on. As a cautionary tale, let's look at Valerian, City of 1,000 Planets. People point at the absence of chemistry between the two leads as the sole reason that film was a massive flop, but no, a pure poppycock. How could anyone believe that after hearing the initial conversation between our protagonists?
I know you're attracted to me, why deny the obvious?
It's obvious.
Yeah, sure. Little goody two-shoes with an Ivy League education are always attracted to galaxy-hopping bad boys like me. You're not gonna find better than me on the market. Handsome, intelligent,
Modest,
brave,
suicidal,
determined,
pig-headed.
faithful.
To yourself.
Yeah, and to you. You're my partner.
We both know you're quite a lady killer. So why do you lose interest in a girl as soon as you win her heart?
Because I'm looking for the perfect woman.
Just admit it. You're scared of commitment.
Oh dearie me. In terms of big budget movies, that's the worst character introduction I have ever witnessed. To shine some light on why the scene was written like that, here's what the writer himself has to say on how he writes his dialogue.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
But I'll tell you what, there's a really interesting correlation I've noticed. I've searched all over the place for this video, and for every great character intro I found where it's dialogue focused, I found 3 that weren't. For every Hans Landa, there's a Darth Vader, an Indiana Jones, and a Joker. The best introductions usually involve minimal dialogue as the character runs around and does something active in the world. For example, Jack Sparrow. Now that's an S-tier character intro. We open with epic music as he stands in the crow's nest, building up how badass this man is, building up Jack's perception of himself. Then he jumps down and we get a wide shot revealing that he's actually in a dinghy. The close-up is us being intimate with Jack, in a way seeing through his eyes, building this grand feeling about him, while the wide shot detaches us from Jack, giving us a more objective view, revealing how very non-grand his situation is. Purely through cinematography, we've learned a great deal about Jack. You've got to respect the creativity. Then he sees the pirates, he shows respect, and we now know, alright, this guy's a pirate, no cringy dialogue necessary. And then the way he comes into port with the epic music still going, it's masterful, not just iconic, but it lets us know how ridiculous this man is, how nonchalant he is through what for near any other character would be a deadly serious moment. Then you've got other such action-focused intros like Indiana Jones, where they treat the character with this air of mystery. For the opening minutes of Raiders, we can't see his face. We only get partial glimpses of him. One of his helpers runs away screaming at a statue, while he calmly walks straight past. Alright, so Indiana's level-headed. It takes a lot more than birds to startle him. He finds a poison dart, but carries on without pause, so we know he's fearless. He pulls out a disheveled map, hinting at the idea that he's been on this quest for a very long time, so we know he's tenacious. Someone in his team is about to kill him, so he reacts instantly and introduces us to his signature whip. This hints he's always alert, that he's mastered his tools and is experienced enough to know what the clicking of a gun sounds like. This is all built up the mythos of Indiana until finally we see his face. Spielberg is trying very hard to make you think that Indiana's a badass action hero, and you know what? It works like a charm, and Indiana's introduction doesn't stop there. The opening 12 minutes of the film is a prologue, a contained short story, much like The Dark Knight or Inglourious Bastards. And these kinds of prologues, as well as telling us what kind of movie this is all going to be, they tell us the crucial details we need to know about the scene's principal character. We see him weighing out the bag to swap with the idol, even though, like gold is actually an incredibly heavy metal and easily weighs more than that sandbag ever did at max capacity, but Spielberg is at least trying to make you think that he's a clever man who understands how these kinds of traps operate, and he's also a prepared man because who carries around a bag of sand with them at all times? And my absolute favourite of the lot here is one that's maybe me reading into it a bit too hard, but if this was intended, it's genius characterization. It's this. Indiana touches the light and it activates the trap. The only problem is, that's rubbish. Light couldn't possibly activate this ancient trap. So what's going on here? Well, my headcanon is that Indiana was already betrayed once. He expects to be betrayed again. So he made his other helper believe the light triggered the trap, not the pressure pad he so happened to put his foot on as he put his hand into the light. This means when the guy does betray him later and rushes back through the trap, thinking he knows what triggers it, he's dead wrong. I don't know if this was the intention from Spielberg, it's entirely possible that some shot was lost in the cutting room floor or something, but if this was intended, it's some badass characterization. In fact, this whole introduction works so well for Spielberg, he reused it for Oskar Schindler. We see his clothing, but not his face. We see him scraping together a ton of cash, then bribing a doorman, building a mystery around the man until finally we see his face. At this, the waiter asks,
Here, do you know who that man is?
I know.
He's a nobody, but by the end of the first scene, through deftly coaxing a colonel to sit next to him and exuding enough charisma to make Tony Stark jealous, he's become the star of the show. At the end of the scene, an officer walks in and asks that very same waiter from earlier,
Who is that man?
That's Oskar Schindler.
This is all not just incredibly entertaining, it shows off the protagonist's charisma and fiery ambition wonderfully. Ultimately, when you boil it down, character introductions are an exposition issue. How do you get across who they are to the audience in an engaging way? And that ultimately brings us back to the issue of dialogue. Oscar's intro is fairly light in dialogue, as is Indiana's, and Jack's was totally silent. And then you've got Valerian's dialogue-heavy intro being a travesty, and then you've got films like Up, which tell us about Carl in what is easily the most heartbreaking intro of any film ever. And that's a montage. What is the deal here? Well, I think it comes down to how action-based character introductions, they're just plain easier to write. Give a talented writer either and they'll crush both of them, but give a less able writer either and they're more likely to engage people in the beginning if they don't use dialogue. Dialogue-driven character intros can be superb, they really can be, so long as the dialogue itself is superb, and let's be honest, a lot of amateur writers struggle in that department. Here's one for you. Can you think of an example where they've opened a film without dialogue or narration and it's broken that adage of show don't tell? Other than the Star Wars title crawls with the literal text on screen, I can't think of any examples here. If you ban dialogue, it forces you to show not tell, and showing in your character's intros is a much better idea than telling. But what does truly great character introduction dialogue look like? Well, I'm in love with Tywin Lannister's first appearance in Game of Thrones, because Tywin's introduction isn't him on some grand conquest or strutting about camp giving orders, it's purely dialogue with his son as he skins a deer. It's so simple, but that simplicity works like a charm here. Firstly, there's the symbolism. The stag is the symbol of House Baratheon, and we see him meticulously taking it apart with precise cuts, which is great foreshadowing, as well as hinting at who Tywin really is. Then there's the juxtaposition. Hold on, this is one of the most powerful men in all of Westeros. Why isn't a servant doing this for him? He should be above such things. These juxtapositions are character gold. It's inherently fascinating to see a character acting in a way opposite to how we expect them to. If it's inconsistent characterization, well, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But when we see someone who's the defense against the dark arts teacher, specializing in combat, but he's a stuttering, nervous wreck too timid to shake Harry's hand, or a ruthless mafia boss playing with a cute cat, or a tech CEO who wants to commit genocide, but he can't stand the sight of blood, or a noble who's happy to get his hands dirty and do a task normally reserved for the lower classes, these juxtapositions, they add to the mystique, the puzzle that is the character, making us curious to see more of them as we unravel what makes them tick. If you could reveal such a juxtaposition in your character's first scene, they're prone to be instantly fascinating. But forget the actions, look at the dialogue. It flows like a natural conversation that's perfectly pleasant to hear, yet with each subtle piece of subtext, we piece together more and more about who this man is.
Oh, Ned Stark. Brave man. Terrible judgment. Catelyn Stark took my brother.
Why is he still alive?
Tyrion?
Ned Stark.
And that is superb dialogue. They mention Ned Stark much earlier in the conversation, so naturally it threw Jaime for a loop. It reveals what Tywin thinks and therefore cares about most. He couldn't give a rat's arse about his son Tyrion, but the political machinations of what's going on and the supremacy of the Lannister house, that's what's on his mind. It also shows Jaime and Tywin are not on the same page here. He cares about his brother far more than Tywin cares about his son. And if we see the rest of the clip...
Why is he still alive?
It wouldn't have been clean.
You spend too much time worrying about what other people think of you.
I could care less what anyone thinks of me.
You know, that's what you want people to think of you.
It is just perfection. In the most subtle, subtexty way, we now know Tywin doesn't care at all for honour and is prepared to stoop to any low to achieve his goals. We also know that Jaime, just like before, doesn't see eye to eye with Tywin on this. We also see how sharp and analytical Tywin is. He's clearly not just one of the most intelligent characters in the show, he's adept at understanding people and how the human mind ticks. It doesn't get better than this. Although, does it? Take the Social Network's opening lines.
Did you know there are more people with genius IQs living in China than there are people of any kind living in the United States?
That can't possibly be true.
It is.
Sorkin is the king of dialogue for a reason. This is such a real line. Like, I've met people who speak like this. They state these supposed facts in the middle of conversations, often making them up on the spot or wildly exaggerating something they once heard, like 3 years back, because it helps bolster the image they want to have. They want to be seen as clever and well-read, doubly so for Mark, seeing as he's talking about IQ, and generally the only people who quote IQ statistics are the ones who care enormously about their own IQ. That one line tells us plenty, but then there's her retort.
That can't possibly be true.
It is.
And the subtle arrogance from him stating something so clearly wrong is reinforced when he doesn't pause for self-doubt, he doubles down instantly when challenged. We get a sense that he doesn't just want to be seen as clever, it's going much further than that. There's a real touch of narcissism to him. We're still in the title crawl, we haven't had the first shot of the film yet, but we already know so much about him. Later, she points out a flaw of his.
You're obsessed with finals clubs. You have finals clubs OCD and you need to see someone about it who will prescribe you some sort of medication. You don't care if the side effects may include blindness.
Final clubs. Not finals clubs.
He can't think of a good enough retort, so nitpicks her grammar the second she's done. A normal, healthy person would at least pause to think of a decent reply, but the fact he attacks her so instantly with such a non-counter argument betrays his deep insecurity. So far, you've only heard him say 3 lines, yet just from that we know that Mark is a massive ego. He wants everyone to see him as a genius. He's deeply insecure. He will happily lie if it means achieving his goals, and he has terrible social skills. God damn, that is some delectably dense exposition. As a side note, this is why subtext is king. It's not just about how stating things openly like this is a bit dull.
I'm haunted by the kiss that you should never have given me.
It doesn't challenge one to think in the same way subtext does, but subtext, when employed properly, is actually a faster way of delivering exposition, as these prior examples prove quite neatly. If you write a 2-minute dialogue exchange of the same quality as Tywin's or Mark's introductions, you can tell the audience so much more than if you were given a 4-minute long narration sequence that's just bombarding the audience with information about a certain character. That's the beauty of the device. Mark's character introduction is superb, not just because we learn about his quirks, but because we get a sense of his wound, of his weaknesses and wants. It's one thing to tell us the traits of a character. That's mostly what we've been focusing on. Captain Jack is whimsical, Tywin's callous and clever, Indiana's a badass, sure, fine, we get it. But if you want to get us to actually care, you need to do something else entirely. Show us what drives them. Show us what haunts them. A tenet of characterization is that if they have a wound, or simply a hole in their life they're looking to fill, that's a reliable way to get the audience on board with that character, even if they're a bit unlikable, and of course it sets you up for a fulfilling journey where they then try and fill this hole. The openings that successfully show the hole in the character's life, they serve as another type of story hook. We want to carry on watching, not because we want to see the anarchy Joker will cause, what this mysterious prologue is about, we just want to see them find what they're after. Take John Wick. A big part of what made that first movie so unique in the action space is they didn't actually begin with a whiz-bang fight scene, they knew better than that. We open seeing John grieving over his dead wife, and we stay with him for a while. Seeing him go through that plight helps us understand his character and invites us to care. Then they build on it by him getting something that might actually help, a puppy from his late wife. There's nothing complex going on, it's simple, it's powerful, and it very successfully gets the audience on board with John as a person, making it hit all the harder when his legs are kicked out from under him. Pixar loves this type of character introduction. They use it in so many of their films. When we first meet Wall-E, we get this. He looks longingly at a couple, then simulates holding someone's hand. How could anyone see that and not feel at least just a little bit invested in his character? He's lonely. This is identical to Luke's moment in A New Hope. Choose the right object, the right thing for them to be absorbed by in their melancholy, and sometimes that's all it takes to convey what they're suffering from and get the audience to care deeply about them. Or take Finding Nemo. When we see the horrific loss of his wife and eggs, we completely understand Marvin and why he's so neurotic when it comes to losing his son. Or The Incredibles. They hold off on showing Bob's wound for quite a while. We see him in his absolute prime, where everything's going great, it's entertaining, and it's not dissimilar from Indiana Jones's prologue. Then wham! It's 15 years later and he's in a shitty job, reminiscing his glory days, wishing to relive them. If a character wanted to be as badass as they once were, we'd already be interested in that kind of story, but the fact we get a good taste of his glory days just makes us want him to get it even more. Partly because it bolsters our empathy, but also because, that prologue was just so darn enjoyable, we selfishly want more of the fun that is following Bob on his escapades. Sometimes you want to play your hand immediately, like with Wall-E and Luke. Tell us their yearnings right away without the preamble. Sometimes a slow burn of a prologue is the right call here, like The Incredibles or Up. Give the audience a nice bit of backstory before the plot properly begins. Only after an opening of them as a far younger person, essentially a different person, do we finally get our true introduction to the character we're spending the rest of the story with. Now, if you want to get the audience to sympathise with your character, that is a reliable way to get them to care. But what is quite a lot harder is getting them to empathise with your character. And a film that does it in a very quirky way is Fight Club. The protagonist is narrating, and through the structure of his framing, or rather the lack of it, that tells us tons about him, because we keep ping-ponging around. 1 second he's about to blow up some offices, and before we've had a chance to gather our bearings to understand the first thing about why he's doing that, he tells us about that time he had his head stuffed into the tits of another man.
We're still men.
Yes, we're men.
But still, the protagonist hasn't made up his mind.
No, wait, back up. Let me start earlier.
This all does a wonderful job at helping you to empathise with his schizophrenia. It's all over the place, it's overwhelming, and it's a great introduction to who he is. So I'm probably going to get a bit of flack for this next one, but I'm holding my ground here. Never give big introductions to small characters who won't be that important. You're setting up a Chekhov's gun to never fire it. As an example, he gets the most badass intro ever. A 2-minute long sequence narrated by Sam Jackson, who, by the way, doesn't narrate anything else in the film. They brought him in just to narrate Hugo's intro, and it tells us about how he betrayed the German army and assassinated 13 officers. We get all hyped up, and in the next scene, he gets shot and dies. What? He never even does anything for the plot either. In the only scene where he has substantial screen time, it's Michael Fassbender's character who gets all of the focus, while Hugo is just kind of there. A bit disappointing, if you ask me. If he were merely any other side character, no one would have minded, but the big, stylish intro gave us a kind of promise. This guy's going to be a major player in this story. Get ready to see more of him, Tarantino says to you, and it turns into a bit of a damn stamp squib. Not literally, Hugo squibs work perfectly fine, but you get what I'm saying there. I'd say this is such a concrete thing, I'm going to coin a rule here. The closer looks first and, well, I mean, like only rule of character introductions is the effort a writer puts into introducing a character should be proportional to how important that character is to the story. Take Suicide Squad 2016. They crap all over this idea, and it's part of why the first half hour of that movie is purely character introductions. It's far too much. We get a monstrous amount of exposition at the start for these minor characters, and while some of the intros are genuinely fun, like Deadshot extorting a mafia boss, there's a lot of storytelling fat here that ought to be cut. Clearly, James Gunn thought so too because he had the right idea with the sequel. Screw the lengthy, PowerPointy introductions, get it over and done with. Don't even acknowledge the Javelin guy or the woman from space. Just have them appear. They don't need an intro, especially considering that they die in the next scene after. The sequel works so much better here because Gunn realized that it's practically impossible for people to become invested in dozens of characters given just a few seconds of introduction each. So why bother? You don't want to fall for the Hugo Stiglitz issue of giving a great deal of setup around a character, sincerely inviting the audience to be interested in them, and then do nothing with them or, kill them off immediately. So Gunn doesn't do it sincerely. It's the perfect approach for a Suicide Squad movie. It's good fun how the protagonist is introduced talking to his daughter, and we think, this must be where we see his sympathetic motivation and we're coaxed into liking the guy. Instead,
you're a terrible father.
Hey, I didn't ask to be a father in the first place. I tried to lay off her, but then she dragged out the paternity test.
Fuck you!
No, fuck you!
The Suicide Squad sequel has far better character introductions in part because the first creator picked the wrong tone to do it with. If the character is a joke, treat them like one.
He's not a werewolf, okay? He's a weasel. He's harmless. I mean, he's not harmless. He's killed 27 children, but, we got him to, I think, he's agreed to do this.
But whoever said you had to introduce your characters by showing them? There are a lot of stories out there where they build a reputation, an expectation around the character before we ever see them. In Pulp Fiction, Jules and Vincent talk about Marcellus Wallace throwing a man out of the window because he gave his missus a foot massage, and they provide their commentary on why they think he did it. Then they go on to murder a bunch of guys in a flat for crossing Marcellus. That whole first scene is really our introduction to Marcellus, even though his first appearance is in the scene after it. Then you've got Silence of the Lambs. As Clarice walks past the cells, she sees increasingly crazy inmates, building up to a man leaping about his cell like an animal, saying something that I can't repeat on YouTube else I'll be demonetized. We see the trend. We know that Hannibal is coming up next, and ask ourselves, what could be more insane than that last one? Some part of us is expecting a demonic beast frothing at the mouth or something ridiculous, and our expectations are broken in the most beautiful way possible when we see Hannibal simply standing there, calmly, waiting and looking like a normal man. That is a juxtaposition much like Tywin skinning the deer or Quirrell being a coward. The combo of the film putting so much effort into building up an expectation, only to shatter that expectation the instant we first see him, makes for a legendary character intro. And again, by this point, he hasn't even opened his mouth. And screw it, who says you can't lie in your character introduction? There are quite a few stories out there that lie to you in their intros, and they do it to great effect. Edge of Tomorrow
was able to kill hundreds of mimics on only your first day in combat.
He speaks so confidently on the news that we think, alright, this is a standard Tom Cruise character, Ethan Hunt 2.0. Only in the next scene, we see his true colours.
You'll be on the beach with the first wave.
I do this to avoid doing that. While it is an honor, General, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to decline.
He's a conniving coward. The film hoodwinks us by setting him up in a certain way, only to then subvert that in the next scene. Some stories going for this approach will instantly subvert what they set up for the joke.
The best thing about Tony is also the worst thing. He's always working.
While others go for a slow burn. Take Homelander. In episode 1, he's made to look out like quite a nice guy.
Copyright infringement is costing Vought $1.2 billion per year.
Hey, guys, come on. What's Starlight gonna think? Now, what I do want to hear is who you saved this week.
It gets the audience to think, well, most of these guys are scumbags, but at least Homelander's a decent bloke. He's basically Superman. He gives me hope for all the heroes in this world. Little do they realise, there are more ways to introduce a character than you can shake a stick at. What you really want to do is identify which one works best for your story and run with it. It's a lot like how for years I've tried to hunt down editing software that's actually good for fiction, and my searches brought up nothing. Like all of the major ones, I cancelled them all on day one because they're made for emails and essays in mind, not fiction. It's a niche in the market that annoyingly no one has bothered to serve. But the other day, I stumbled across Pro Writing Aid, and it's exactly what I've been looking for years. Editing software specifically for writers. It gives you feedback on your descriptive prose in a ton of useful ways, like how repetitive it is, or if you're using passive voice. It allows you to search for adverbs so you can prune them, and you can filter by within dialogue or outside dialogue. And that is a lovely touch, because people speak with adverbs all the time, so you don't want to spoil the realism of your character's speech. And I've just scratched the surface here. There is a whole suite of other features that I found really useful for editing my fiction. This simply is the best grammar software for writers that exists in the world right now. That is a clear fact. So I reached out to the folks at Pro Writing Aid, and I'm chuffed to say they've agreed to be a sponsor on my channel from now on. And here's the real kicker: if you click my link in the description, you can get this for free.
Free?
Yes, it is actually free. They've got their paid version, of course, but you can download the free one right now to use forever. In itself, it's got lots of bells and whistles that you'll find useful for editing your fiction, but if you're ready to upgrade and get the far better paid version, do use my code CLOSER20 at the checkout and you'll get 20% off their yearly plan. I am dead pleased right now because I only sponsor services that you guys will find useful, and this is far and away the most useful service for writers that I've ever sponsored. What's also been a surprisingly useful feature is how they give automated story critiques to you. It's obviously not quite as good as a real person's feedback, but their AI has given me a lot of surprisingly useful pointers. It goes beyond spelling. If the scene's pacing is too slow, or if I head hop, or if a character just feels a little too flat, it's uncannily good at recognizing when that happens and letting me know when I need to make a change there. If these guys keep up the good job they're doing, I'm going to be using this one for the rest of my life. I'm dead serious there. And if you want to join me, all you've got to do is click my link in the description, try it for free, and if you're happy with it, you can then use my code CLOSER20 at the checkout for 20% off their yearly plan. If you're serious about writing to a professional quality, you've got to give this one a try. It's well worth the price. Anyway, thanks for watching, keep writing, and I'll see you guys next time on The Closer Look.